Welcome, CMA students, to this explainer. Okay, let's jump right into the good stuff. Today we're talking about strategy. Strategy is literally the ultimate blueprint that separates the thriving, dominant companies from the ones that, well, just fade away. Think about it. If you're building a massive skyscraper, you don't just blindly start slapping bricks together, right? No way. You need a master plan. In the business world, and especially for your CMA exam, understanding that master plan is absolutely crucial. We're going to unpack the exact framework organizations use to build a totally sustainable competitive advantage. So, let's start with a definition. Strategic management is a set of managerial decisions and actions that determines the long-term performance of an organization. But you know what's really interesting? Historically, this was just called corporate planning. Seriously, just planning. The shift from basic corporate planning to what we now call strategic management happened for one massive reason: competition. Today, competition is the central, defining characteristic of the business environment. So, achieving a competitive advantage is the primary goal. It isn't just about planning for the future anymore. It's about planning to win.
Here is our agenda for today's explainer. Number 1, the strategic blueprint. Number 2, surveying the landscape. Number 3, designing the plan. Number 4, executing the strategy. And finally, evaluating and controlling. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The strategic blueprint, focusing on vision, mission, and culture. Before making any competitive moves, a company has to define its ultimate vision. And a really critical distinction here is understanding exactly how companies view themselves. A product-oriented vision defines a business strictly by the goods or services it provides. It's limited. A customer-oriented vision, on the other hand, defines the business by how it provides solutions to customer needs. This gives managers so much more strategic flexibility. But keep this in mind for the exam. To be truly effective, these visions can't just be fluff. They need to be backed up by hard-to-reverse strategic commitments and tightly tied to economic fundamentals.
Let's ground this with some real-world examples of customer-oriented visions. Nike doesn't say, hey, we make running shoes. Nope. Their vision is to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world. Amazon doesn't just say, hey, we sell books and gadgets online. They aim to be Earth's most customer-centric company where people can discover anything they might want to buy. Tesla doesn't just say, we build electric cars. Their goal is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Notice the pattern? These visions completely avoid generic feel-good statements. Instead, they focus on a realistic, credible, and really attractive future that actually solves a fundamental customer need.
Section 2. Surveying the landscape, environmental scanning.
Think of this step as testing the soil before pouring your concrete foundation. Environmental scanning means constantly monitoring, evaluating, and disseminating information from both external and internal environments to key people in the organization. The whole purpose here is to identify the strategic factors that will shape the company's future. And organizations use a really wide range of methods for this. It goes from highly formal, systematic techniques like single variable extrapolation and mapping, all the way to intuitive methods like unstructured expert opinion. You've got to scan it all.
Section 3. Designing the plan, strategy formulation.
Okay, so now that we know exactly what we're dealing with out in the environment, it's time to actually draw up the blueprints. Strategy formulation is all about developing long-range plans for effectively managing environmental opportunities and threats, but strictly in light of corporate strengths and weaknesses. Yep, that's your classic SWOT analysis. Formulation involves defining the mission, setting concrete objectives, developing the actual strategies, and setting overarching policy guidelines. It's a very intellectual, forward-looking phase.
Section 4. Executing the strategy. Strategy implementation. Now, a master plan on paper is, well, just paper. We have to transition to the gritty reality of actually taking action. Listen up, because this is a classic exam trap for CMA students. You need to clearly distinguish formulation from implementation. Strategy formulation is primarily an intellectual planning process driven by top management. Implementation, however, is totally operational. It's action-oriented. It involves day-to-day decisions in resource allocation, and it's typically conducted by middle and lower-level managers, with review by top management.
So what does implementation actually look like on the ground? It's the process where those brilliant strategies and policies are finally put into practice through programs, budgets, and everyday procedures. This means concrete actions. We're talking about putting quality improvement programs into place, changing how a product is designed, repositioning a product differently in the market, doing market segmentation, expanding through mergers and acquisitions, or, in some cases, even downsizing the company. This is literally where the strategy becomes reality.
Section 5. Evaluating and controlling.
If implementation is laying the bricks, this final phase is the building inspector coming in with a clipboard to make absolutely sure the physical structure matches the original blueprint. Evaluation and control is the process of monitoring activities and organizational performance. Step 1. You monitor the activities. Step 2. Actual performances are compared right up against the desired performances. Step 3. You take corrective actions to resolve any problems. And step 4, which is absolutely vital, identifying weaknesses triggers the entire process to stimulate and begin all over again.
And that brings it all together. Strategic management is definitely not a straight line. It is a continuous, never-ending feedback loop. It goes from environmental scanning to strategy formulation, right into strategy implementation, and then evaluation and control. It's not just a one-time event that happens at some fancy annual corporate retreat. The knowledge gained during evaluation feeds directly back to the top, becoming the crucial input for the very next round of scanning and formulation.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. You've just learned the exact master blueprint that the world's most successful organizations use to completely dominate their industries. But hey, strategy isn't just for massive corporations. How are you going to apply this exact continuous loop to your own CMA exam preparation? Think about it. Scanning your syllabus, formulating a rock-solid study plan, actually implementing it through the daily grind, and then evaluating your practice test scores to find your weak spots. Because let me tell you, if this framework works to build a billion-dollar company, it is absolutely going to work to help you pass your exam.
Let's kick things off today with a pretty high-stakes question, just to prime your critical thinking for the strategic direction concepts you're going to see on the exam. So what is the single biggest driver of a company's strategic future? Is it the product, the target market, the CEO? Well, as we're going to uncover today, the answer actually lies in the foundational frameworks that guide literally every single decision an organization makes. Today, we are analyzing the top-down strategic pyramid. We're going to distill the exact definitions and key distinctions you absolutely need to master your strategic management exams. But look, this isn't just about rote memorization of textbook terms. It's really about understanding how these elements interact to create a real, sustainable, competitive advantage in the business world. All right, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The power of vision. 2. Defining the mission. 3. Customer versus product focus. 4. Real-world mission examples. And finally, number 5, organizational culture. Okay, section 1, the power of vision. We are starting right at the aspirational peak. So a vision isn't just, a simple goal or your average next step. As the literature notes, it actually represents a discontinuity. It is a step function. Basically, it's a massive jump ahead, so the company knows exactly what it is to be in the future. It's the vividly descriptive, desired future state of the whole organization. It shouldn't be some generic, feel-good statement. It needs to be specific, credible, and really attractive. And going by Ozhar's 2008 framework, hitting the nail on the head with a truly great vision gives an organization some massive benefits. First off, they are inspiring and exhilarating. They help create a common identity and a shared sense of purpose. Plus, a good vision is competitive, original, and unique, while still being practical enough to actually make sense in the marketplace. It also pushes boundaries, fostering long-term thinking alongside risk-taking and experimentation. And internally, a good vision represents genuine integrity, is deeply customer-oriented, and gets your internal stakeholders totally invested in defining it. Crucially, it aligns your organizational structures. Think about it. If your compensation system doesn't match your vision statement, you're simply not pulling in the same direction. Moving right along to section 2, defining the mission. This is where we get into the day-to-day operations. So, defining the mission is step 1 in the actual strategy-making process. A mission statement lays out a company's fundamental, unique purpose and its present business. It essentially answers 3 vital, non-negotiable questions: who we are, what we do, and why we are here. It announces exactly what the company is providing to society, whether that's a service or a product. In simple terms, this statement sets the scope of operations, promotes a sense of shared expectations among employees, and communicates a clear public image to important external stakeholders. Up next, section 3, customer versus product focus. This is all about your strategic orientation. Now, you've really got to contrast these carefully, because honestly, this is a classic trap on the exam. A product-oriented business definition focuses strictly on the characteristics of the products sold and the specific market served. But our sources warn that this approach actually obscures the company's true mission. On the flip side, a broad, customer-oriented view focuses on the customer's needs rather than any particular product or solution. This broader definition is an absolute game changer because it safeguards companies from being caught totally unaware by sudden major shifts in demand. It lets them capitalize on environmental changes. Actually, there's a crucial point here that captures this perfectly. You should definitely memorize this exact framing for your exam. A product is merely the physical manifestation of applying a particular skill to satisfy a particular need for a particular customer group. If a company gets tunnel vision and only focuses on that physical manifestation, the product, they completely lose sight of the ultimate driver of their strategy, which is the underlying customer need. Okay, Section 4, Real-World Mission Examples. Let's see this theory in practice. Take a look at Alibaba's mission, to make it easy to do business anywhere. Notice how this is entirely customer-oriented? They focus on the underlying need, doing business easily, rather than defining themselves by specific e-commerce software or web products. That gives them massive strategic flexibility. Or what about Better World Books? Their mission is to harness the power of capitalism to bring literacy and opportunity to people around the world. This perfectly shows how a mission can proudly announce exactly what a company is providing to society as a whole. It's grounded, yet incredibly impactful. Then we have Google, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Again, they steer completely clear of a limiting product-oriented definition. If they had defined themselves as just a search engine company, their growth would have been severely capped. Instead, focusing on accessibility and usefulness allows them to expand into cloud computing, mobile operating systems, the whole shebang. And wrapping up our examples, we have SpaceX. Their mission is to make human life multiplanetary. This identifies a fundamental, incredibly unique purpose that sets the company drastically apart from traditional aerospace firms. It's incredibly concise, staggeringly ambitious, and it dictates exactly what their present business is fundamentally all about. Finally, Section 5, Organizational Culture. This is the strategic bedrock. For the exam, I want you to hyper-focus on two specific phrases here, unconsciously and taken for granted. Organizational culture is defined as the basic assumptions and beliefs shared by members that operate entirely under the surface. It's about the routines that accumulate over time and dictate how groups actually respond and behave in relation to the issues they face. It's basically the taken for granted way of doing things. And because it dictates all this baseline behavior, culture connects right back to the top of our strategic pyramid. It has undeniably important influences on the development and change of organizational strategy. Listen, you can have the most inspiring vision and the most customer-focused mission in the world, but without aligning those deeply ingrained unconscious routines at the cultural level, your strategy implementation is inevitably going to falter. So as you hit the books and prep for your exam, I want you to chew on this final thought. If culture operates in the shadows, entirely taken for granted, how exactly can a leader bridge the massive gap between a highly deliberate strategic vision and the stubborn, unconscious routines of their own people? Master that question, and you've mastered strategy execution. Today, we're going to master the really complex, often totally hidden relationship between organizational culture and strategic management. If you're prepping for your exam right now, understanding how culture acts as this sort of invisible hand guiding a company's strategy is, frankly, absolutely vital. For your exam prep, just remember this simple 3-part breakdown. We'll unpack the 4 layers of culture, see exactly how they drive strategy, and then wrap up with 3 highly actionable steps to foster ethical behavior. All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the 4 cultural layers. So let's start by mapping out the actual theoretical framework of how an organization's culture is built from the ground up. It really helps to think of an organization's culture kind of like a giant iceberg made up of 4 concentric layers. We're going to peel these layers back one by one, starting right from the visible surface above the water all the way down to that deep, invisible core. Okay, so the very first and most visible layer is values. Think of these as the ultimate bedrock of a company's culture. They spell out exactly how managers and employees should conduct themselves and do business to hit their mission. Now, here's a super important distinction you need for your exam. Values have to be specific, actionable norms. They shouldn't be vague, fluffy statements like, service to the community or honoring equal employment opportunities. No, they are the concrete standards that control how employees actually work day in and day out. Digging just a little deeper below the surface, we find beliefs. These are much more specific than values. You'll often hear them in how people just naturally talk about everyday issues, like a belief that the company absolutely shouldn't trade with certain countries, or maybe that professional staff shouldn't be appraised by managers. But here's the crucial takeaway. Culture is all about the collective, right? So when an individual's personal values and beliefs violently clash with the collective organization's beliefs, well, that's exactly where major ethical tensions and problems ignite. Moving down to the third layer, we hit behaviors. Simply put, these are the day-to-day ways an organization operates, and they're completely visible to people both inside and outside the company. We're talking about practical work routines, how the organization is physically structured and controlled, and even those softer, more subtle issues around symbolic behaviors. Basically, it's the culture actively in motion. And finally, we reach the very center, the absolute core. These are the taken-for-granted assumptions, which are also referred to as the organizational paradigm. This is the set of assumptions held in common and just completely taken for granted across the entire company. These are aspects of organizational life that people find incredibly difficult to even identify, let alone explain to someone else. They operate entirely behind the scenes, representing this invisible, fundamental view the organization has of itself. Which brings us to a really critical pivot point for us. If this core of a culture is essentially invisible and totally taken for granted, how in the world does it dictate corporate strategy? I mean, why is this unseen paradigm so centrally important to management? Let's tackle that in Section 2, Culture's Influence on Strategy. We're going to look at exactly why culture heavily dictates strategic direction. This relationship basically hinges on two primary concepts. First off, actually managing culture is notoriously hard. Because that invisible core is taken for granted, it's super difficult to observe or identify, and if you can't observe it, you definitely can't easily control or manage it. Having a way to analyze it is key. Second, and this is a pretty massive trap for a lot of businesses, culture acts as a huge driver of strategy. Organizations can literally get captured by their own culture, finding it nearly impossible to change their strategy outside the bounds of what that culture already permits. So, when faced with a chaotic, rapidly changing business environment, how do managers cope? They generally don't invent an entirely new paradigm. Instead, human nature takes over. They desperately search for solutions they can understand and cope with purely within the bounds of their existing culture. And if that culture is misaligned with the new reality, well, the strategy is inevitably going to fail. That leads us to Section 3, Fostering Ethical Organizational Behavior. To prevent that kind of negative cultural capture and actually ensure long-term stability, there is a clear path forward. Businesses have to actively build an organizational culture that places a massive premium on ethical behavior. For your exam blueprint, make sure you memorize these 3 highly specific, actionable steps required to foster this kind of ethical behavior. Number 1, explicitly articulate values. Number 2, leaders have got to give life and meaning to those words. And number 3, you must implement robust incentive and reward systems. Let's break down how this actually translates into concrete corporate action. First, many companies explicitly articulate their values by drafting a formal code of ethics, basically a direct statement of the ethical priorities they adhere to. Second, leaders absolutely must breathe life into those words. They need to use every opportunity to stress the importance of business ethics and ensure that key business decisions make both good economic sense and good ethical sense. Some companies even go a step further and hire independent firms to audit their behavior, just to guarantee it matches their code. Finally, you need real incentive and reward systems, promotional structures that reward people who engage in ethical behavior, and strictly sanction those who step out of line. I want to leave you with this really powerful metaphor from the material to lock in your understanding. Ethical core values underlay the vision statement to ensure the stability of the strategy. They are the guardrails that keep a company on track when pursuing its mission and competitive advantage. Think about it. If your strategy is the vehicle driving towards success, your cultural paradigm is the engine. But without explicitly stated ethical guardrails, you're essentially driving blind near a cliff. As you wrap up your prep, ask yourself this. If you were auditing a company tomorrow, would you be able to spot their invisible paradigm before it forced them off the road? Good luck studying, stay totally focused, and definitely use these frameworks to your advantage.